Hello everybody, my name is Liam Walken and today we will be showing you how you can go about converting a standard tub surround like this into a much more modern walk-in shower. To kick things off, of course, we need to take out the old. In order to do this, we will just take a multi-tool here and cut some nice lines alongside the tile where it meets the drywall. This is going to make the removal of the tile and backing board a lot cleaner and easier. Now, throughout this project, you will see us using a variety of tools, many of which are not essential. So I will do my best to try and make a note of what I consider a must-have and what you can go without. The multi-tool is a must-have. For most showers, you will find a nice thick bead of caulking alongside all of the corners, so you do just want to take a nice sharp knife and kind of do your best to score that and cut it as deep you can. This is once again just going to make the removal of all the tile and backer boards a lot cleaner and easier. To remove the plumbing fixtures, there's usually just a couple of small set screws, either an Allen key, Phillips flathead, who knows, depends on the fixture itself. You're going to want to remove those and do your best to pry the fixture free. Every fixture is going to be different. There's going to be little tricks to each and every kind. However, no matter what, you do want to make sure that you have your water shut off to the bathroom. If there's not an individual shut off for the bathroom, which in most houses there won't be, you'll want to shut off the main water line to the house and then drain the system of any water. So that would be turning on the lowest available sink or faucet in the home. If you are unable to pry any of the fixtures free, sometimes they can corrode into place pretty badly. You can, of course, smash them out with a hammer or try cutting them free with a grinder or a sawzall. These are very valid methods of removal. However, they are just a little bit more aggressive. With the fixtures now out, we then like to take a hammer and just smash a nice horizontal line about halfway through the tiles. Depending on the tiles and the backing board that was used, this can result in varying degrees of difficulty, but no matter what, with enough force and a big enough hammer, you can get through it, I promise you. One other tip for this, of course, is once you kind of have one piece out, the rest are a lot easier to get a hold of. You just want to try to take a hold of both the tile and backer board and start rocking them back and forth, freeing them from their fasteners. For this part of the project, you will want to have a respirator, eye protection, ear protection, some steel-toed boots, and a nice cold drink for when you're done. Now, we are located in Canada, in which we have 4 seasons. As such, we do have this insulated exterior wall alongside vapor barrier. And if you find something similar, a lot of times with these old fiberglass bats, there'll be some dark spots which people can mistake for mold. It's usually not. It's usually just improper air sealing. So airflow has gone through those bats of insulation, dirtying them. So don't be too alarmed if that's something you find. Typically, there'll be some fasteners or nails along the top of the tub flange here, which are just securing it to the studs. You just want to do your best to cut these out. Right here, I'm using a sawzall with a fine metal blade on it. And this is another one of those essential tools. You'll need a sawzall as well as a wood blade and metal blade for it. To disconnect the drain of the tub, we're using this tub removal tool here, which just inserts in and twists out. You don't need this. You can also just use a couple of screwdrivers, put them in an X, and then twist them apart from each other. If that doesn't work, sometimes you do have to smash this out of place. They can be really seized in there. So once again, sawzall or hammer are your friend for demolition. But with that, we can get the tub out. So we're just going to try to lift it on the one side here. This was quite heavy, but we can get it out. 2 guys really helps for this type of thing, although you could certainly do it alone. And then for the time being, just to get rid of this trip hazard, I'm just going to give a little rough cut to the old drain here and then put a test cap on it for the time being until we open these subfloors up and relocate our drain. Would be a good idea to take an old shop vac, take out the filter and suck all that water out to avoid any potential mess. These are the copper water lines that supplied the water to the old shower system here. So we will just be taking a pipe cutter and cutting them down nice and low, maybe 16 inches or so above that bottom plate. And then I'm going to make use of these shark bite end caps, which we only use as temporary fixes, but they are very nice for when you're doing demo here. Cut off your pipe, clean it up a little, deburr the inside, outside, take some sandpaper, get rid of any of that ugly, gross stuff on the outside of the pipe, and then insert your shark bite end cap, making sure it's fully seated onto that pipe. That way, eventually you can repressurize the system. Now, while in this video, we will be focusing on the shower itself. It's important to note that this was a part of a larger entire bathroom remodel. If you are going to be using this video as sort of a guide and you're planning on do a curbless shower, as is the method we will be using in this video, you do at the very minimum have to redo the flooring as well to tie your waterproofing system into the floor outside of the shower as well. But we will touch more on that later. While this step may not be relevant to your situation, this is a common find in our area with these tub surrounds. They often have these dropped ceilings above them, so we want to get rid of that to create a more open and grand feeling shower. Now, of course, oftentimes with these as well, the mice absolutely love to live in them because of all that extra warmth from the insulation. So it can be a little bit gross, but we're just going to cut this out, get rid of all of this now disgusting insulation. We'll re-insulate later on, but we just want to remove all of this material for the time being. And as this is Canada, as I've mentioned, we do have a lot of blown in insulation above. Typically we would bag this up and just use it to re-insulate later on, but because of the latrine situation up here, figured just throw it all away. It's no good. We'll just get more and replace it later on. But we do just once again want to be making use of this Sawzall, nice metal blade to cut any of those nails out, or the wood blade to cut pieces of framing in half, and just get rid of this box that they had built for the dropped area so that we can eventually get our ceiling to be perfectly flush. We did end up cutting that drywall ceiling back a little bit further because there was some mold growth due to the lack of an exhaust fan. But for the time being, we're just going to throw up some new vapor barrier, just stapling it into place for the time being. And that's going to help with the heat coming down from the attic space as we're working in here. With the demo now complete, we can start thinking about building our actual shower. However, before we start building it, we have to plan it. And the first step here is going to be figuring out the size. Now, with most tub surrounds, you're going to be looking at about 32 inches of depth. However, with this bathroom, we had the opportunity to go bigger. Our limiting factor here is going to be that window. If we went all the way up to the casing, that would give us 38 inches, which is a considerable improvement from the existing situation. The only downside to this is by butting that tile up to the casing, it can look a little cramped sometimes, so a small gap can go a long ways in the aesthetic. However, you have to ask yourself, would you rather those 2 inches or a little bit of an improvement on that gap size? Another very common bathroom configuration is going to be this line style 5x8, 5x9, 5x10, so on. And the limiting factor here is actually going to be your toilet. We need at least 15 inches of clearance from the middle of that toilet to either side. So oftentimes with a style like this, we're going to be stuck with the existing shower size. Hopefully all of that made sense and you were able to configure out your exact size using that information. For this video, of course, as mentioned, we will be doing the curbless shower design, and as such, we're going to start by just marking that line on the floor so that we can cut open the subfloor in this section. If you're not doing a curbless design, you're going for that more traditional curbed section, you do not need to do this, and you can simply skip ahead of the recessing part of this video. However, for the rest of you that are proceeding with this style, I'm just going to start by, of course, we marked that line, and then I'm going to go ahead and take a Sawzall with a nice wood blade on it and cut along the perimeter along the bottom plate of the shower space here. You do want to be extremely careful when doing this, as if you plunge that blade in too deep, you could potentially cut a mechanical item below. So you really just want to take your time with this, cut a nice shallow groove and go along the perimeter. This is a skill saw. It's another one of those essential tools for this job, and we're just going to set it at a depth of the subfloor. In our case, that was 5/8 of an inch. For a lot of you, it will be 3/4 of an inch. You just want to set it around that depth and then cut along the line you marked. And then we're also going to take a few more rips throughout the body area of this subfloor, and that's going to make ripping it apart a lot easier. For some of you, this floor might be glued and screwed down, in which case you'll have to remove all the screws manually. Although in our case, it was simply nailed in, which made the demo a lot easier. Now, having better access to this drain, I can go ahead once again with the Sawzall and that fine tooth blade and just cut a nice clean line along the pipe section here. And that way I can adjust the drain location to be center of my shower. Now, you do not need your drain to be centered of the shower. However, in this design, we are really focusing on symmetry, and because there was no joist directly in our center line, it created a nice opportunity for us to center that drain and create a cleaner look. You can absolutely go for an offset drain, a linear drain. There's all sorts of options. However, in our case, in this project, we wanted that nice center look. Now, the material of our drain here is ABS, which is very common in our area. So we're just going to be using the ABS cement to secure any fittings to pipe, gluing both the inside and outside, combining them together, giving them a nice twist when possible to ensure we have full coverage. If you have PVC, you would need to prime it first. You have that additional step. And if you had, say, copper or cast iron, you would want to probably adapt them to either PVC or ABS. Now, I do need to get through 2 joists to get my drain to be centered here. So I'm just going to go ahead and kind of find the height of that existing fitting, and then I can mark it on the next joist, followed by the next joist. And I just want to make sure I'm going slightly higher with each hole. That way I can maintain the proper slope for my drain. I'm going to be using this right angle drill to chew a nice hole through this joist here. And anytime you're drilling a hole through a joist, you want to try to contain it to the middle third of the joist and keep the hole size less than 1/3 of that joist size. So if you had a 2x8, you want your hole size to be less than 2.5 roughly. I do also want to mention that this I would consider a non-essential tool. You can absolutely use just a standard drill and like a hole saw even. However, we do this professionally, so that tool makes it a lot easier for us. Now you can see just on the top of the drywall there that I did put a nice X that marks the center of our shower here, and that's where I want the drain to end up. So I just have that P-trap kind of configured in a way which I can see where I need to get it. I can take a measurement, get the length of pipe that is desired. Then I can just take this pipe cutter to make the cut. You could of course use that Sawzall once again if you don't have this tool, and that way I can run it through both holes and get it to my P-trap. I also just want to make a quick note that this is 1.5-inch pipe. Some areas you might be required to be using 2-inch. That's going to depend on your local area. It would also be a good idea at this time, after glue up, letting it cure, you can go ahead and just dump some water down this. Make sure you have no leaks. Most of the time, we'll just use a long 5-foot threaded steel hose that we have connected to a nearby shutoff, but we didn't have that here, so just taking the old bucket and dumping it down this pipe. We do have to remove these existing cross braces for our recessed shower here, so we're just going to cut them out. These are just put in to strengthen the subfloor, prevent sagging, to kind of fasten those joists together to help distribute the load a little bit better. So if you need to remove them, something you could do is just get, say we're using a 2x8 joist here, get a piece of 2x8, cut it to the exact size between those joists, and then just kind of get your new piece of blocking underneath the non-recessed area of shower if you wanted to introduce some of that strength back with the blocking. Right here, I'm just going to go ahead and with my tape measure, take some measurements of all of these joist bays. So I'm just kind of looking for the general width here. I'm gonna make a little note of all that as well as the length. And this way I can go outside and cut some new pieces of plywood to the exact size to fit between those joists there. So you can see here, we have a nice sheet of 3/4 inch outside here. We just went ahead and transferred those measurements onto it, drew up some lines, and then we can take the skill saw once again to cut out the pieces. So while we use use the exact width that we recorded, the length of these pieces is actually going to be about 3 inches longer than our shower size. So for here, we had that 38-inch shower. These pieces are going to be about 41 inches in length, and you'll see why in just a moment. And then for every joist within our shower space here, we're going to cut a 2x4, two 2x4s per joist. And this we're actually going to do smaller than that 38 inches. So for this one, about 36 inches in length. And again, you'll see why in a moment. I'm also going to take some PL construction adhesive here, cut off the cap, pierce the seal on the inside, and then get it in this caulking gun here. And we're going to need this for the next step, which is of course sistering up those pieces of 2x4 we just cut to the sides of the existing joists. The goal here is that we want to recess these 2x4s at the thickness of our subfloor. So say we have these 3/4 inch pieces of subfloor going back in now. We're going to take these two little test pieces that we just cut, hold them on top of that 2x4 so that the top of that subfloor, those little test pieces, are flush with the top of that joist. Then we can nail in the 2x4 into the side of the joist, leaving about a 1-inch gap on either end. So you can just see at the bottom there, a small gap between the end of that 2x4 and our existing bathroom subfloor, and using the pneumatic nailer to get this into place. This is one of those tools I would consider non-essential. You can absolutely use construction screws for this instead, or even GRKs. You just want to make sure you're using a whole ton of them. Get that nice tight bond.
You didn't want to write please subscribe on that one?
Maybe the next one.
For the spot with our drain here, of course, we cannot run a 2x4 through that drain. So instead, we're just going to cut out a section of 2x4 here. So we'll have two individual pieces on either side of the drain here. Once again, you can see Sebastian's got his hands on that test piece, making sure it's flush with the top of the joist as I drive it into place with these fasteners using the pneumatic nailer.
Yeah.
With our first section now sistered up, we can go ahead, apply some more glue. You want to do a dry fit first with those plywood strips you cut, but we want to get this piece in now. That way we don't have to work like a bunch of circus clowns here balancing on the joists. So we're going to just apply a nice bit of more construction adhesive on the top of those 2x4s as well as the end of the plywood strip here. That way you can see we're going to slide this under the existing subfloor. That way we can bond the two together, and that's going to provide a whole lot of strength here. You can see we're just kind of trying to slide that under, and then once we get it into place, we can actually go back and slide it under the other side there under that wall. So we have a nice tight bond where it's now secured at both ends as well on top of our sistered up 2x4s. And then with that in place, we can take some 1 3/4 inch flooring screws and put one every 3 inches or so. With this last bay here, there was a steel I-beam underneath the entire exterior wall there down below. So we weren't able to get any framing in there. So instead what we did here, as you can see, we just kind of created a stack of 2x4s, gluing, screwing, and fastening them all together. And then just getting them all lined up nice and flush with each other. As really what we're trying to do here is just get enough backer for our shower pan eventually to go in and have something nice and solid to sit on top of. So sometimes as you're doing these renovations, you'll run into weird situations like this where you find a steel I-beam and you got to work around it. And then for this bay here, of course, that wall was constructed over top of the middle of a joist space. So we're gonna have to work around that, as well as all of the plumbing ran up through it as well. So you can see I just took some measurements, made some marks, and I'm just gonna use a jigsaw to cut out some space here to get this piece underneath that wall. Jigsaw I would consider to be non-essential. You could use another type of saw to make these holes. But once I have that little dry fit, we're gonna go ahead, apply a ton of construction adhesive, fasten it onto the one side of the joist that we do have in, and then we can use some structural GRKs to pull that up and really secure it to the bottom plate of this wall. Another good choice here would be to use some lag bolts to kind of have the heads come up from underneath as we've done before here, and then just take some big nuts and some washers to really secure those all into place. For the shower, as I touched on, symmetry is a big deal. So we wanted to get a niche in the center of this back wall here. However, you can see we had an existing vent for the plumbing ran right through the center. So all I'm gonna do here is cut a nice section of it so that we can eventually get some framing in the middle of this wall for a niche. So I'm just gonna cut it a couple feet from the ceiling, a couple feet from the floor. And then I can also go ahead, cut the fasteners, the nails at the top and bottom of this 2x4 here, free from the top and bottom plate, and then I'll be able to kind of get a grip on the 2x4, pry it free from the drywall screws that are on the other side of it. That way I can shift it all the way over to the right side, making room for my desired niche length. To reconnect this vent, I'm just going to take some 90s and basically 90 the vent over into that rightmost stud bay, go up and then angle it again and reconnect it to the top of that vent. The only thing to note here is, let's say maybe this was a vent for a tub on the other side of this wall or a sink or something. You just want to make sure your first 90 is 6 inches or more above the highest fill line of that fixture. So in this case, this was a vent for down on the floor below. So we're good to 90 it over at any height we wanted. To put in the rough framing for the niche here, I'm gonna just take the distance from my left 2x4 to my right, those two studs, cut a new piece of 2x4 to that size, and then nail it into place. As far as the height goes, I really like to have the niches correspond with the grout lines of the tile. So for the piece that we're currently putting in, both the bottom and top 2x4, you'll see me placing, we put those at a much larger distance than what we will actually need. So let's say our niche is gonna start at 48 inches and at 60 inches. I might put my bottom piece here at 40 inches and my top piece at 70 inches. We just want to make sure we have enough room between them so that we have plenty of wiggle room for that niche placement when the time comes. Next, we can think about our plumbing fixtures, and this is another very common scenario in which there's a stud ran right in the center, exactly where you want your mixing valve, your shower head, all that fun stuff to go. Most mixing valves can be placed so that if you were to install a backing piece of 2x4 directly on that drywall there in your standard 2x4 cavity, that's going to be the required depth or the correct placement of your shower valve, but every valve will tell you differently. So you just want to make sure when you have your mixing valve, you kind of look at the rough in for it and see what kind of depth it wants from the finished wall. So in this situation, we would have 1/2 inch of backing board and about 3/8 inch of tile. So I know that my finished wall will be about 7/8 from the existing framing here. Most cases, again, a 2x4 put flat against that back wall will just work, but you can see I just kind of took a piece of 2x4, marked out a line alongside this stud, and that's what I'm going to cut out. That way I have room for my plumbing to go. This is a non-load bearing wall, so I can go ahead and chotch it up. As you're seeing me now, I just set the skill saw to the depth of that pencil line. I'm going to run a few different cuts alongside it, right kind of in the middle where I want my mixing valve, and this way I can go and just knock these chunks out, making room for my fixture. But of course, that skinny little section there isn't going to be enough meat for me to fix my mixing valve onto. So I'm just going to go ahead and take another piece of blocking here and then screw that directly into this now chotched out area of the stud. The clients on this job did want that nice ceiling mounted rain head for that symmetry as mentioned. However, we do have an attic space above us, so this requires a little bit of finesse. What we did here was cut open that vapor barrier we just put up, and then I'm installing a drop ear that is just a connection point for both our water line and eventually the fixture of that rain head itself. So I'm going to screw that in so that it's directly center of the shower, directly above that drain there. And we're going to actually create a custom little tent almost out of the vapor barrier here to insulate the water line that's in this attic space. That way it gets the climate controlled temperatures from the bathroom here, and we'll re-insulate all above that vapor barrier tent. That way it's protected from the cold winter frigid temperatures that this attic will eventually experience. For this project, we will be using PEX type A for all of our water lines, which is the expansion type fittings. However, for most of you, I would recommend just PEX B. That's the crimp ring style PEX, as it's much more accessible for most people. Now, whether you're using PEX A or PEX B, both can actually be crimped. However, only PEX A can be expanded. So you'll see here, I just do have that kind of expansion fitting. I'm going to put over the end of this, and then I do have the expensive expansion tool to expand this pipe where it will then fit over that drop ear I just installed. But once again, for most of you, I'm going to recommend just get the much cheaper crimp style tool. You'll put your little O-ring over the end of that pipe and crimp it onto that fitting there. Most mixing valves will come with these 1/2-inch ports. In our case, you could either solder a piece of copper into them or they have the male threads on them. So in our case, because we are using PEX A as we just went over, I will be using a combination of Teflon, pipe dope, and then putting these female PEX A 1/2-inch connectors over top of all of that prep. So I'm just going to start by going over the mixing valve here, 3 to 4 revolutions of Teflon, and then I'm going to take my pipe dope, that's that blue stuff there, apply a nice liberal amount of it around the outside of that Teflon, and then I can put my adapters into place. I want to get them nice and tight and finish them off with the channel locks to make sure they're really secure. For the shower system that we'll be using on this project, it will have both a toe check or a tub filler down low, a handheld with an adjustable bar on the right-hand side, and that ceiling mounted rain head. So right here, I'm putting some blocking in for both the water connection, that's another drop ear for the handheld water connection, as well as some blocking for the adjustable bar that comes with that fixture. This is also a nice time to mention if you're thinking about maybe putting some grab bars or anything like that in your shower, now would be a great time to go around with some extra 2x4s and just put additional blocking where you might need it. For the mixing valve here, I did just mark a center line for this wall that'll be from the inside of my glass to the outside of the tile on the other wall. I want that center marked. It will also line up with both the drain and ceiling mounted rain head. And then I'm going to fasten that to the blocking using a couple of screws. Typically, we mount these anywhere from 40, 44 inches, somewhere around that height. And as mentioned, this is that drop ear. That's the water connection for our handheld, which will just be going on the right side here. So I'm going to just kind of have that at the same height as our mixing valve, and then right below the blocking we had installed for the adjustable bar that it pairs with. This way it's going to look really clean. Going to kind of have it centered between that wall and the mixing valve. And once again, fastening in with some screws. Every mixing valve is different. The one we are using here is a diverter style, meaning that it will have the option not only to control the temperature, but also where that water goes. So I have the left and right port, which is going to be my hot and cold in. I'll have then the top 2 ports, the one that goes straight up, as well as that angled one here, which will both go to shower fixtures, as well as that bottom port, which I currently have capped off, but will eventually go to the tub filler down below. Now, because the diverter is a part of the actual mixing valve. I'm sure some of you may have heard, oh, you have to run copper down to your tub filler. Not with a valve like this one, where we can simply switch where the water goes directly in the mixing valve itself. So you can see here, I have that one line that ran down from the ceiling mounted rain head, and then here just a short line to connect another one of these ports to that handheld.
I don't know why. I'm sure it wasn't PEX B. We didn't crimp them.
Now these joists were a little bit wonky. There's a bit of a high spot in the middle here, so I am just making use of this planer to just shave off a little bit, get it nice and flush with the subfloor on either side. This planer is, I would definitely consider non-essential, but it is also really nice to have, not only for situations like this with these joists, we just need to take off about a 16th or so, but also on your walls. When you're tiling, especially if you're using these large tiles nowadays, you really need your walls to be flat. So before we board up, we will actually take a nice long straight edge with a level and just make sure that our walls are nice and flat. If they aren't, sometimes the planer can really come in handy for making them so. But again, you don't need it. There are workarounds for this. For example, on this spot here, you can take an orbital sander, sand it down. If you really were ambitious, hand plane it, take a multi-tool, a Sawzall, just for small little adjustments, but it is nice to have. Now, unfortunately, this entire house was kind of a little bit sloped, meaning that our shower space here was really out of level, and we're gonna have to pour some self-leveler in to fix that. So what we're doing here first is just priming all of the subfloor here, and then we're gonna take some just latex caulking. Anything would really work for this case, but we just wanna fill any of those gaps, make sure that our self-leveler can't escape. And all along the perimeter, we're just gonna take some spray foam and make a nice dam. This is gonna just make sure that the self-leveler doesn't escape anywhere, but also leave a little bit of an expansion gap between the cement and any framing of the house. Because of course, as houses expand and contract, we want to leave a little bit of a gap for most things to prevent any cracking later on. So the shower was about 3/4 inches out of level over 5 feet, which is very considerable. So it absolutely needed to be addressed. You can see here, I have my 4-foot level. I'm just going to hold it to where the point is that it is level, and then drive some screws down at certain sections. That way, when I go to pour self-leveler, the leveler will eventually cover those screw heads, and it's just used as a kind of a guide, a reference to make sure that we have enough of that self-leveler poured in certain areas, and it will reduce the risk of having to make 2 pours or have things to fix later on. Now, of course, anything we do on the subfloor in the shower space here, we have to match on the outside too. So this inconsistency with the slope of the house ran all throughout the bathroom. So while we're only going to show you the pour in the shower area itself here, once we had completed the pour within the shower stall here, we did actually build up that foam dam that divided both the bathroom floor and shower floor a little bit higher, and then also leveled the area, the general bathroom floor as well, to make sure everything was consistent, flat, and level. I am just going to make use of this trowel here to help that leveler out a little bit to find its nice resting place. And don't be fooled by the name of this stuff, self-leveler. That's just not true. You really need to kind of put those screws in, as you saw me do, to help find that true level, and then use something to just kind of help move it around, let it find its nice happy spot. Hopefully, however, most of you won't have to do this step. It's not too often that we have to pour self-leveler. The vast majority of houses are pretty well within level. Before we can start boarding up the walls, we do want to do the ceiling first. So this is just 1/2-inch green board. Some ceilings will be 5/8, in which case you'll want to use 5/8 drywall. But here is 1/2 inch. So we just match that using the green board for its mold resistant properties, and then just driving a heck of a ton of drywall screws up into this thing to make sure it never sags or that it's not going anywhere. And of course, we did put some blocking alongside any butt joints, and just trying to get a really secure bond to prevent any cracking later on. And all of that vapor barrier was sealed up just to have a full air seal. This step is not at all necessary, but one I would strongly recommend, which is soundproofing. So this is just Rockwell Safe and Sound. We're going to fill all of these interior walls up with this stuff, and it's really going to help provide a little more privacy in this bathroom. And yeah, it's just a great product that I'd recommend if it's something you're interested in. Now this bathroom was a complete gut, so you can see here we're going to start boarding up the rest of the bathroom space with drywall. I'm only showing this part because of course that left edge of this drywall will meet our shower area. So all we did here, of course our showers meet 38 inches, so this drywall is going to kind of go right to that 38-inch point, and that's the way in which we're going to kind of terminate our connection and eventually tie it into the waterproof system that we will be installing shortly. I'm going to start with the plumbing wall here, although it doesn't truly matter what you start with, but I'm just take some measurements of the bottom and top and then transfer that over to one of these boards here. So this is a product called Curdy board by Schluter. It's just a foam board that has that waterproof membrane along the front and back of it. So I'm just going to take my mark and kind of see 38, and then I can, using the grid system that's already on this board, just run a nice sharp knife along it, snap it the same you would drywall, and then cut the back side of it, and that way I have it now ripped to my desired size. This would also be a great time to go ahead and mark your stud locations. You just take a pencil, a Sharpie, and kind of make a line at the bottom and tops of your studs. That way when you put the board into place, you know where to screw. Now with this piece, because we do have so many perforations with all of that plumbing, we're just going to go ahead and take some measurements and mark out the locations. So you can see Sebastian on the left showing me kind of where all of those markings are for the mixing valve, handheld, and tub filler. I'm going to take a Sharpie, mark those out, and then we'll use the appropriate sized hole saws or spade bits to drill out the area. And we have found it just helps a little if you just take a straight edge and kind of mark your stud location with a Sharpie, just decreases the chance of you missing. Now with this system and all foam board systems, you do want to be making use of these washers. So these washers, we're just going to put them about every foot or so along each stud here and just kind of placing them into the foam. They will just kind of pierce it really nicely. And once we have all of that set and also getting this kind of divide that drywall and Curdy board right where they meet, we can then go ahead and screw them into place. For the back wall here, we did just opt to mount them horizontally instead. You could, of course, do vertical, just end up with a full board and maybe a strip. Doesn't really matter, horizontal, vertical, whatever you prefer, as long as you get it all. So here, similarly to the last rip, now I'm just going to be going down instead of lengthwise, just scoring it, snapping it, cutting it again. A very common question I get asked regarding this system and just waterproofing in general is, can I use Go board on the walls and a Schluter shower pan for the floor? The answer is yes, of course. I mean, you can do anything you want. Will it be waterproof? Yeah, as long as you follow all the correct steps, absolutely it will be. Why we don't do that is here in Canada, Go board costs the same amount as this Curdy board. So for us, it just makes more sense to just use the one system, get that lifetime warranty from Schluter. But for those of you in the States where you can get Go board for a third of the price and use the sealant kind of system instead, yeah, if that's something you want to do, go for it. We're now going to be installing our tile underlayment for the rest of the bathroom floor. However, this will be tying in to our shower floor, so I did want to showcase it. I'm going to start by just kind of cleaning up the subfloor here. We went ahead and vacuumed it, and then we're going to take a damp sponge, just get rid of any dust, let all of that dry. And then we will be applying this peel and stick primer once again by Schluter. The system we'll be putting down here is called Ditra Peel and Stick. It does a couple of things. One, it's a tile underlayment, so it will just create a nice backer for your floor tile to prevent it from cracking in the future as it uncouples it from the structure of the house. And two, it is waterproofed itself. So we're gonna be able to tie that in to our shower floor. That way, because we don't have that curb, we wanna make sure our waterproofing is waterproofed good ways outside of the shower area as well. So this version of Vitra is peel and stick, meaning it just has this kind of plastic. You peel off the back of it and you just stick it down to the floor, and that's how it adheres. And it's a really strong bond, by the way. We've been using this stuff for a long time. I love this product because of how easy it is to work with. You see, we just kind of roll it out to the length of the room. You cut it with a sharp knife, and then here we're gonna have a nice straight edge where it meets our shower pan eventually. That way there's just less to eventually waterproof, because we do want to connect the seam of it, the end point of it, to all the orange system that you see before you. So we want that all connected essentially. So once again, you can see I just took a measurement. I'm going to cut out this section for the corner, do a little dry fit, and then we'll just peel that backing off, tamp it down into place. And if you want an even tighter bond, you can roll it out with a roller. Although certainly you could just use, say, a grout float or all sorts of different things. A rolling pin would probably even work to really just kind of get this pressure activated adhesive to bond to the floor below. And finally, moving on to our shower pan. So this here is again by Schluter. It's all the same system. So this is their 38-inch by 60-inch shower pan. But as you can see here, I'm just going to modify it slightly. So our finished dimensions end up being maybe 59.5 inches. So I just had to take about a ½ inch off of either side there to get it to fit in the space, and just use a skill saw to do it. And then at this time, I'm also going to prep up some squares of the Curdy membrane there. So I'm just cutting them into nice symmetrical squares. And you'll see how that's utilized in just a second. I'm also at this time going to prep my drain because it comes with that 2-inch ABS port. I'm going to transition that using a fitting to 1.5 inches. And also at this time, I'm going to finally drill out the hole for our drain. So I'm going to start with a 5-inch hole saw in reverse just to lightly score the self-leveler. You don't want to use it all the way or you will ruin your bit on the cement if you did have to pour like myself. But I just wanted to kind of score it, get an idea of the space, and I'm going to chisel out all of this cement within that 5-inch radius, and then eventually I'll put that hole saw back in, cut through the subfloor, revealing my P-trap down below. To configure my drain, I did just take a long piece of ABS, call it 6 inches or so, stuff it into the collar, which again is a Schluter product, and then I can measure the difference of height, so that gap between that white foam there and the bottom of the flange. Take that measurement, cut that off of my stem piece here, and that way, when I put the remaining length of it back into place, the bottom of the flange on the right there will sit flush with that white foam, and that's what we're looking for here. And I'm just gonna, for the time being, glue the one side of this stem into the P-trap, although I'm not yet going to actually put my drain piece in, as that will be done momentarily. To finish off the waterproofing of this system, I will be mixing up some thin set now, and we will once again be using a Schluter product, All Set, which is their thin set. It's very good. It is expensive, so if you didn't want to use it for everything, say you're tiling, fair enough, but I would at least recommend it for the waterproofing portion, although we do use it everywhere now. I'm going to start by just putting in the correct amount of water as per the back of the bag into a bucket. We do have a vacuum hooked up to this with the whale tail attachment. That's not an essential tool, but it certainly helps if you're going to be mixing this indoors. And we're just going to pour in that thin set and then mix it all up. The consistency we're looking for here is a little on that thinner side, that more liquidy side than what we would use for, say, tiling. So maybe a little bit looser than peanut butter. We do want it fairly wet to make sure that we get a nice bond with the Curdy membrane. But again, the back of that bag will tell you the correct amount of everything to mix in. To apply our thin set, we will be using the Schluter Curdy trowel, which it was made specifically for this purpose. And I'm just going to go ahead and apply it over the entire seam here of where that Curdy meets drywall. Something you can do is, if you want to waterproof a little bit outside of your shower to be safe here, you can actually mud eventually over the Curdy fleece. It bonds together really well with the drywall mud. So oftentimes we'll just extend this banding a little outside of where our finished tile will go, because corners, we can just mud over it with drywall compound. But you can see I just kind of got the thin set into place all along that, troweled it out using directional troweling so they'll flow in the same direction. I'm applying my band from not necessarily all the way to the ceiling, but certainly very high up, any section that would see water. And then I'm going to take a couple of dull drywall knives to compress all of that thin set, get any of that air out from behind it, and we want to bond the membrane to the backing behind it. We don't want to squeeze all of the thin set out. We're just trying to get the air out from it. And then just to make your life a little easier, you can take a sponge and clean up any of that excess thin set on the drywall side, because if you're going to be mudding over it later on, it's just easier to not have dried thin set beneath it. You can see here, this is why we cut up all those squares. You could take long bands and just waterproof over the entirety of kind of that underlying stud. I found it just easier and cost less materials to do individual squares like this. So I'll just provide a lot of thin set over that washer and that screw there, trowel it out, put the square on, and then once again, just like the banding you saw, just kind of compressing it, getting a good bond. And we're just going to carry on. So we're going to want to put those squares over every single washer, long pieces of banding over any corner, any seam where boards meet each other. They do make dedicated flange seals for the both. You can kind of see I got those brass nipples for the 2 plumbing fixtures on this wall. So they do make pipe seals that you should be using over those. I personally don't like those. I just find them to be a real hindrance later on when you're going to install your fixtures. And every fixture I've installed either comes with a gasket or we put a bead of silicone around it to make sure we have a nice tight waterproof connection. But of course, Schluter's recommendation would be to use that pipe seal. They do also have a little valve seal that would go around your mixing valve there, but that only works with a small selection of mixing valves. And once again, I just haven't found it to be that useful personally, but of course, Schluter would recommend using it. For any corners, similar concept to all of the other banding, just gonna get your thin set in there, trowel it all out, directional troweling, cut your banding to the desired size. And for the corners, there is one kind of caveat where you really want to prioritize getting one side on first, using your drywall knife to kind of compress it into that corner best you can, because you don't want to end up with rounded corners with this membrane, as it can make installing the tile later on a little tricky. So if you have a new drywall knife, I would recommend dulling the edge of it up, because you don't want to pierce this membrane with that. But drywall knives that we're using here been used a ton. They're nice and dull, which make them perfect for flattening this membrane, especially on those inside corners. We can kind of push the membrane into that corner a good bit. That way we have a nice right angled corner and it's not rounded out at all. For the shower pan, you will have wanted to do a dry fit first, but after confirming it does fit and everything lands where it's supposed to, you want to take just a damp sponge, kind of just apply a little bit of moisture to the base here. That way it won't pull all the moisture out of the thin set itself, and it's just going to help get a better bond. For this, we'll be using a 1/4 inch by 3/8 inch square notch trowel to comb out all of the thin set within the shower area here. I'm just going to start by spreading it all out, nice liberal amount, and then I'm going to come back with directional troweling, ideally towards the shortest side to give the air the best chance it has to escape, although I'm sure you'll get a nice bond either way. And we're just going to directionally trowel this all out, making sure we have full coverage in this shower area. I'm then going to embed these foam spacers for the drain collar into place. I'm just going to apply that into the thin set I'd laid out and then apply even more thin set to the top of it, just getting a nice amount on here once again. We'll then apply a good amount of ABS cement, both that stem below and the inside of our fitting on the collar here. I'm going to push it down into place and just twist it around a good bit to make sure we have full coverage with that cement. I'm going to kind of wipe away any of that excess just to make it a little bit cleaner. And then we're going to smooth out any of that excess thin set from collapsing this. Make sure we maintained our directional troweling, and then we can insert the pan into place. You do want to make sure you walk around on this a good bit to collapse all those ridges, get any air out. If you are going to be a bit of a knucklehead like me and stand on it directly with your shoes, make sure you don't have any like nails or staples, sharp bits in your shoes. Otherwise, it would be a good idea maybe put a piece of cardboard down first and then kind of tamp over top of that just to be safe. You should also at this point just confirm that you have the right slope everywhere with this pan. Of course, this pan comes with that built-in slope to it, so we want to make sure that we see downward slope towards that drain on every single plane of this thing, as it'd be a lot better to find out now if there was a problem versus later on. I would probably recommend starting with any of your corner pieces just because they can be easy to miss and you wouldn't want your shower to fail because of a missed piece of corner banding. So Shooter does make these inside and outside corner pieces. So for the shower, we just have 2 inside corners, which makes this nice and easy. Once again, you're gonna see just getting a whole lot of thin set in there, getting that directional troweling, and then I can get my corner into place, making use of my 2 drywall knives again. One will just kind of hold it nice and tight into that corner. The other, I'll go and collapse all of those ridges, just trying to get all of the air out, get any excess thin set out of there, make it nice, clean, and waterproofed. Then with this back corner now, I'm going to take more banding, cut it to size. We do want to see at least a 2-inch overlap over any banding. So you want to cut it so that it's going to cover both of those corners that you just installed. And then we can once again use that directional trowel. You might be sick of hearing me saying that, and apply that thin set in there, get that banding into place, collapse those ridges. It's just more of the same, really. And for both of the left and right side here, I am going to expand the banding to go well outside of the shower area. So for this side, I'm just going to go all the way to that corner. You can see that corner bead there. I'm basically going to take my banding pretty well all the way to that just to ensure we're fully waterproofed. Of course, with a curbless shower, you always have that additional kind of risk. There's no curb to contain it. So it's just much safer bet to extend the waterproofing out to the bathroom floor as well. For the drain here, the pan will come with this collar piece, like the little donut shaped of membrane. So just gonna, same as everything else, you know how it is at this point. Get your thin set on there, trowel it out, put on your membrane, collapse those ridges. You got it. And finally, to finish off our waterproofing journey, I'm just gonna go ahead and bond the Curdy membrane of the shower pan to the Ditra of the bathroom floor. I'm gonna take the same banding, make sure we got that overlap on either side, place it right over the center of where the two materials meet, and just like that, we have a nice waterproofed shower. After giving this all time to cure, if you wanted to, you could conduct what is called a flood test. I will refer you to Schluter's video on that. We've stopped doing them for these Curbless showers because I've found that by kind of building the temporary dam needed to flood test a Curbless shower, I thought it was more risk than it's worth it, because when you pull off that temporary barrier, you kind of risk damaging your waterproofing system, which I didn't love. And especially because we've done so many of these systems, I know that we're doing a proper installation of the system, but I'd always recommend doing a flood test, especially if you haven't done this before. Just, you'll have to refer to that Schluter video if you're interested. But after that has all cured, the next day we can finally start tiling, and we're going to start with the shower floor here. For this project, we will be making use of 24-inch by 24-inch rectified porcelain tile. Now, in order to use a tile this big on your shower floor, you will be needing to make use of something called an envelope cut, and I will direct you to a video that I have on this subject if you're interested in learning how to do it. I will note that I don't feel as if this is necessarily a beginner technique. If you've never worked with tile, I would instead recommend sticking to a smaller tile, like a mosaic of some kind for your shower floor. This way it can conform to the various slope on that shower pan, and you won't have to get an advanced cut like this one down for your first time. And I get it, mosaics, you might have had bad experience where they get gross, but nowadays you could try something like an epoxy grout if that is your concern, that maintenance, and still use the mosaic and have a more maintenance-free shower than what you might have been used to. But anyways, I'll be making use of this wet saw here, this DeWalt wet saw. I love this thing. I get a lot of concerns anytime I show cutting this thing of like, oh, your hands are real close to the saw there. This is a continuous rim diamond blade, which means it won't cut flesh, as you can see here. It's made for grinding stone and harder objects like that. So look, don't go poking your saw, okay? I'm sure someone will find a way to hurt themselves or have a different type of blade, but I'm being perfectly safe here, I promise. But anyways, I'm going to go ahead and make all my cuts, do a dry fit in the shower, make sure everything lines up good, and then I'm going to go ahead and comb out my thin set. Now, in the past for tile of this size, we had been using a 1/2 inch by 1/2 inch square notch trowel. I'll refer you to a video by Tile Coach, but basically, turns out there might be some better available trowels for this size. So here I'm actually using a 1/4 inch by 1/4 inch by 1/2 inch U-notch trowel. I won't get into the nitty gritty, but yeah, I've definitely found that the coverage on this thing's better than what we've been using before. So it's what we'll be using going forward. So I am just going to start by getting thin set throughout the shower pan here. And the consistency of this thin set as we are tiling is thicker than before. It is more of that peanut butter consistency. I'm going to start by getting my Schluter drain into place. So it has 3 pieces, and then I'm just going to leave it high for the time being and insert it into that thin set. I'm then going to start placing all of the pieces of my tile, which I have labeled so I know where they go, into position with tile spacers that are 1/16 inch thick. Again, if you are a beginner, this might not be the exact cut for you. You might want to just stick to a mosaic for this. It'll be a lot easier. You can just place your mosaic in, tamp it down, and get a much easier result that way. Now, this style of system that I am using comes with wedges so that you can get rid of lippage between tiles, and I will be putting those wedges in momentarily. However, anytime I do this with an envelope cut, I like to avoid them at first. That way I can fine tune everything once I have all of my tiles into place. I also get a lot of questions about this. Well, don't the wedges get rid of the slope of the tiles? No, they don't do anything that drastic. They just make minor corrections for minor amounts of lippage. They're not going to pull your tiles out of their slope. But we will be, just for this day, installing this shower floor, which will then carry out to the rest of the bathroom floors. It's all the same tile, so we'll get all of that done today, let that cure, and then the next day is when we'll start doing the walls. So for today, it's just floors, and this is just the method that I found to be right for me. So the next day, just going to go ahead with a rubber mallet, knocking free all of these wedges and then cleaning up any of that cured thin set in the grout lines. You do want to do your best to kind of clean out those grout lines as you're tiling, as it's much easier to clean wet thin set than cured thin set, especially if you're using all set like we are. That stuff gets really, really hard and bonds to just about everything. But sometimes you'll have some that you can't get, especially if it's beneath a wedge or something like that. But something we've found to help with that a little bit is white vinegar. We'll just take some white vinegar, put it on a rag, and then just kind of softly run it along the grout lines. You don't want to soak this stuff so it's like getting into all of this thin set below the tiles. We just want to soften up any of that surface thin set, any of that stuff that's like inside of the grout line that we will eventually need grout to fill. Just going to run that everywhere, soften up the thin set a little, and then take a sharp knife and then just kind of make sure your depth isn't too deep because you don't want to pierce the waterproofing below, but just kind of taking out a little bit of the thin set along the surface there to clean it all up, make room for the grout. We will then protect all of our newly installed floors. So taking some nice thick blue tape here, going along the perimeter, and then we'll lay out this cardboard everywhere, this paper floor protection that is, tape it all down to that tape, and that way we know we're not going to damage our tile beneath it. This is also a great opportunity to reuse the box of which your shower pan came in, as it's going to be that beautiful size that you want there, and it's going to offer a little more protection for your shower floor. Next, we're going to want to figure out the end points for our tiled walls. So for this, I'll be using a laser to make sure everything's absolutely perfect. And as we discussed earlier in the video, for this shower here, we're limited by that window. So I effectively just took our line and marked 3 inches from the window jamb there. That way I have enough room to install 2.5 inch, 2 3/4 inch casing along this window later on. For this project, our wall tile is once again 24 inch by 24 inch rectified porcelain tile. And you might be thinking, okay, well, if I have an 8-foot ceiling, I can just put a full tile down, boom, 4 tiles, perfect. No. We don't do that, okay? Reason being is 24 inch tile is not truly 24 inches. It's a bit of a lie trying to bamboozle you there. So instead, what we're gonna do here is I'm gonna make my starting line about 11 inches. That way we can start with a half tile and not only start with that half tile, but out of 1 full piece of tile, we can actually get 2 tiles for our bottom row because 11 inches is less than half of our tile size. But anyways, you can see here, all I've done is we have that laser now established at that 11 inch mark. I'm going to take a tile, flip it over so its backside is now facing me. I'm going to take a Sharpie and just put a line directly through the center of this laser level. This way, I'm going to also mark a little check mark on it so I know which is the side to keep. This way, when I flip it over, I can transfer my Sharpie line now to the front. And this way, the cut side of that tile will be against the floor. That way we have a factory edge along the top. So it's just a really simple method. And when we do this, I do actually take that Sharpie line when I transfer to the front and just move it up a smidge. That way we have a little tiny gap at the bottom of the tile where it meets the floor tile, just to have a gap there and eventually later on fill with silicone for an expansion joint. And once again, making use of the DeWalt wet saw here, I'm just going to kind of take the saw, kind of put it down over the one line, and then I'm going to move it, the bridge of it all the way up to the front, make sure that the saw is dissecting the back of this line too, make any adjustments I need, and then I can turn it on and rip it down to size. Do you need a saw like this? No, this is not an essential tool, although it will certainly make your life easier to have a nice wet saw like this. You can absolutely use a snap cutter instead. You could even use a grinder, but this will make your life a lot easier. Tiling is one of those things I often hear from people that is kind of the thing they hate doing most. It's the thing they won't do in their own home, and they would do everything else. And I get it. Having nice tools makes it a lot more enjoyable though, of course, but some of these tools can be expensive. So you don't need a saw like this, but it will certainly help and make your life a little easier. But you can see here, I do just kind of like to score about halfway through the tile at first for my first pass through, and I'll actually go back and then cut to full depth on the return. And this is just often, with most tiles anyways, I found to result in a much cleaner cut and make the tile less susceptible to cracking or breaking. Now you will also definitely be needing some of these little wedges. I got these little red wedges here, they come in all sorts of different colors and whatnot though, but you want the hard plastic ones, not those little rubber ones because they'll compress under the weight of the tile. But these hard plastic little shims are gonna make your life a lot easier. When you're using this large rectified tile, that means it's all perfect, right? It's kind of been cut to be the exact same size, have these nice square edges. And if you're trying to consider maybe you're using 1/16 grout lines like we are here, it's really important to have everything perfectly level, which these little shims will help you to achieve. But also as you're going up that wall, if you ever need to make a very slight micro adjustment, we're talking in the ballpark of 1/64 of an inch, these will allow you to do that. And on that subject, if you are a beginner, I would recommend sticking to 1/8 inch grout lines. 1/16 is just a little trickier. With the 1/8 inch, you gotta think that's double the size, right? So it's a lot higher like margin of error, it gives you a little more room for some smaller adjustments. If you ever have to cheat something, you can kind of get away with that with 1/8 of an inch. And just as you go down, it gets harder is all. You can see on that right hand side though, I did opt to go with a full tile so that on the left hand side here, I'll have to cut this tile. So I'm just take a couple measurements to mark out a line and then I can cut that tile to the size and dry fit it into place. The reason of which I chose to go with the full tile on the right hand side rather than just having that grout line that we kind of have on the floor establish our tile size is because with a shower of this size, 38 inches, basically the back middle of that wall will be a full tile. The right side of that will then be a cut tile. So the left side of this wall will be a cut tile and the right side of this wall will be a full tile. So it almost gives that effect of the two corner tiles wrapping because they're both cut down. They can almost, especially if you had say a 32 inch shower, they can really give that nice wrapped feeling. So that's just kind of the mindset for why I chose to have a full tile on this outside, cut tile on the inside. When it comes to tiling walls, we'll often, especially when using these larger tiles, we'll actually back butter the wall and trowel out the back of the tile. So as you can see here, I'm just doing a nice thin layer of thin set on the areas of which we'll be tiling. And then for the tiles themselves, we'll flip them around on a bucket, dump a nice glob of thin set on it, and then use some directional troweling to get our trowel lines on the tile. Often, because there are two of us, this just creates a really nice efficient system in which we're able to quickly tile, and it keeps it a little bit cleaner too. When it comes to setting your tiles, you do want to make sure you're collapsing those ridges. So you can see with this tile here, I do have those ridges going up and down. So I would want to kind of take that tile, put a little bit of pressure on it and just move it back and forth to try and get those ridges to collapse, get all that air out. Then I can go ahead, get my clips into place. I'll do 2 on each surface here. And that way, when I start laying more tiles, I can get my wedges in, get rid of any minor amounts of lippage and create nice consistent grout lines. I want to pay attention to the laser line that I have and make use of the red wedges we talked about to get that extremely level when using these larger tiles and smaller grout lines. Any sort of discrepancies you have at the beginning just get worse and worse as you go up. If I were to give any advice to beginners that are going to be trying this for themselves, it would be maybe just to mix a half bag of thin set if this is kind of your first time doing this. That way you have more working time, you won't feel rushed as you're trying to tile this wall here. And start with maybe the easier wall if you have one, right? So in this shower, I have a wall with a niche in it, I have a wall with plumbing fixtures, and then I have this wall here that has nothing on it. So you can start with the easiest wall. That can sometimes help make things a little bit easier. And then you'll want a sponge or a couple of sponges on hand as well. Just clean up any mess you might make as you're working with the thin set. Now, once you do have those first row of tile kind of set and installed, you have it all wedged together, your shims are in place, you know that you're perfectly level. The rest becomes a whole lot easier because at this point, especially with a wall like this where there's only 2 tiles, one of which being a full tile, you start working your way up, making sure you're kind of checking each tile. Your grout lines are all consistent, especially at the 4-way intersections. Just getting rid of any minor amounts of lippage, trying to make sure you're getting that good coverage. And it's pretty straightforward once you're working up like this. You should also be periodically checking to ensure that your wall is both flat and plumb, especially if there's going to be glasswork alongside it, like is the case with this one here. If you are just doing, say, a shower curtain rod, you know, not as important, although it's still nice to strive for perfection. But if you're doing glasswork, it really is important to have that nice flat plumb wall. To cap off the edge of our tiles, we'll be using a tile profile. So to start this, I'm just going to take a tape, mark 10 inches down from the ceiling, and then I can take that tape, mark from the floor up to that line, and then whatever my measurement is, I can just add 10. Just helps to get a really accurate measurement, I've found, by doing it this way. So with that number in mind, you can go ahead and cut your tile profile. In this case, we're just using, I think this is a 1 by Prova maybe, in a brushed nickel finish, and just going to cut it on the wet saw to get it to length. You can also cut it with tin snips, all sorts of different tools. They're fairly easy to cut. And I do typically like to get rid of a little bit of excess material at the ends here, kind of cut it at a 45, as you can see there, with just some tin snips. And then after you've cut it, you might want to just file it down. You could even use some sandpaper, because sometimes the cut, if you're going to use a wet saw like I did there, can leave it a little bit rough. It would be a good idea at this point too to just take some thin set and get it behind that tile there along that edge, so it's nice and fresh. Especially if this took you a little bit to tile this wall, you want fresh thin set in there to make sure you get a good bond with the tile profile. And then you'll just want to slide it into place, get it between the tile and backer board, inserting it in, and you might want to do a slight gap. So some profiles will just have a system built in, others not so much. So you just could leave like a 16th inch gap, for example, if you wanted to, and then you could grout that after. This is Schluter's 12 inch by 28 inch Curdy prefab niche. However, because of the tile layout and this shower, we are going to cut out 4 inches of it. That way it'll be the exact size of, or at least the width of one of our tiles. So it'll look really nice just from an aesthetic point of view. You'll lose 4 inches worth of storage space, but sometimes sacrifices must be made for the aesthetic. And when you're doing a bathroom or a shower, you'll have to make these kinds of decisions a lot. It just comes down to what do you like visually, what do you like functionally, and what do you value more. But in this case, I'm just going to go ahead and mark a couple straight lines and then take the skill saw and cut out that chunk of material. I do like, when doing this type of thing, to just take some brad nails, just kind of insert them halfway into the foam here. And that way, when we reattach the other piece, it's just a little bit stronger. But with the brad nails all in, take a nice thick bead of Curdy Fix. Of course, you could use other adhesives, silicones, because we're not really waterproofing it right now. We're just trying to get it glued up together. So just take a bead, you take the other half and just kind of squish them together and let it cure up. Now we can finally get back to cutting out the niche. We roughed it in so long ago. So what I did here is you can just see that laser line running through that established grout line roughly at about 5 feet. So that in this case will be the top of our niche. Now here we will be doing a mitered niche. That's where we will cut the tile edges at a bevel to make it feel wrapped. If you're a beginner, once again, probably wouldn't recommend that. Better just use tile profiles like we did on the outside of the tile edge, or even those nice stone threshold pieces can be a little bit easier too. But with our laser line, I'm going to take about 2 5/8 inches up, make another line there. Again, this is more relevant to mitered corners. However, if you were doing, say, tile profiles, you would just go 2 inches up then. But with that in mind, you can take your niche, find the center of your wall, and then just draw it out on the back wall here with a Sharpie. Once you have that drawn out, you can take your multi-tool and cut out a nice square of the Curdy board, revealing hopefully your rough framing where you had left a gap for the niche earlier. Now we'll be putting a niche LED strip light in the top of this here. So what I'm doing right now is just cutting a hole for the wire that we left in the wall. So this is just a low voltage wire that runs from the niche location here to under the vanity. And then at the vanity, there'll be a 14.2 Romex cable from that same spot over to a switch. So the switch will send 120 volt down into the vanity, where there'll then be a low voltage driver, convert that 24 volt DC, which comes back on this low voltage wire you're now seeing, and will power up the tape light. So just cut out a hole for that, kind of ran it through the niche, and then can do a little test fit, make sure it all fits nicely. Of course, we'll need some blocking to be able to screw this niche into place. So just took a couple pieces of 2x4, kind of cut them to a rough size, and then we're just going to screw them into place for now. And then insert our niche, use the washers just as we did for the wall board, screw it all together, and then use some membrane to waterproof all of our seams. With that, we can start tiling this back wall now, and this will be pretty well the exact same as the previous wall we just shown you. The exception, of course, being that now we have 3 tiles, so the right and left tile both will be cut to size. So what I'll do here is I'll focus on getting the middle row up, so I'll do the middle tile, and then I might cut the right tile to size, just because that right tile is, of course, meeting our previously tiled wall. So we have to be really careful with the reveal that we leave, because it is sort of a finished corner, right? So with any corners, I might leave just a 1/16 inch gap, and that's just to fill with silicone later for expansion. However, on the left side, because we haven't yet tiled that wall, we can be a little kind of more lenient with whatever gap we leave, because we will be able to cover it up once we do the tiling on that left wall. When it comes to putting the tile above the niche here, it's going to be very similar to any other tile, but of course it's not supported from the bottom. So to kind of combat that, we'll just take a couple of clamps and reverse them. That way we can use the clamps to find the exact level for this tile and have some support while that thin set cures up. I do want to note that while we will be tiling the entirety of the shower in the same day, if you're a beginner, don't attempt that. You're definitely just going to want to do one wall a day maybe and see how that goes. Take your time, do it right. Don't try to rush things. Don't try to get a whole lot done. Don't bite off more than you can chew. As far as this last wall here, really want to make sure that we're ending our tile at the same point as the other wall. So you're really careful with all your measurements, your laser level, get all that going. And once again, this wall, very similar to the previous 2 walls. The exception with this wall going to be all of our shower fixtures. So at the bottom, we have that toe check here. So just going to take 1.25 inch diamond hole saw on the grinder to cut that out, as well as our handheld. And later on for our mixing valve, I'll be using a 4-inch diamond hole saw to cut that out. However, for most of you, you'll just use a grinder blade. So this is what I would call a somewhat advanced niche with everything going on in it. We'll be using the full mitered corners, beveled edges to wrap it all with the same tile. We have a light at the top of it. So if you're a beginner, I know I've mentioned this already, but maybe some things that you might want to skip out on, but it's entirely up to you. My order of operations here will be to begin. I'm just going to get the back tile in because that's just going to done with. I can slap it in the back and then not have to worry about that at all. So I'm just going to cut a tile to size for that back there, get all my thin set in place. And if you do have any veining of any kind, you might want to try to see if you can get that veining to flow through. This tile was pretty lax on any sort of thicker veins or more unusual patterns, so made it a little more simpler. But you get that back tile in, then I'll actually get the aluminum channel for our LED tape light up into place. So I'll actually just make a little hole on the backside for the wire to pass through, kind of use enough thin set and just push that up into place so that's out of the way as well. If you do want to learn sort of these mitered edges or beveled edges, I do have a video on it which you can watch. But as far as the niche goes for these mitered pieces, I'm just going to start with the bottom one. I'm just going to use a drywall knife to get a whole lot of thin set in there. Instead of troweling it out, I do just want to get a whole ton of that thin set. I've found it's easier this way to manipulate it to the exact position that I want it in. And as far as any concerns about getting full coverage, I think it'll become very obvious after putting this piece in. Full coverage has been achieved by the amount that comes out. So I do like to be a little messier when it comes to doing these. You know, you got to clean it up, you got to use a sponge, get all that excess out of there. But the plus side of that is that you can manipulate the piece to whatever slope you want, whatever position you want, and get full coverage. It's really important with this bottom piece that you do have a slight pitch to it, so some slopage towards your drain. So of course any water that's in the niche can kind of find its way out, or at the very least not pool in the back of it. Now you don't want too much slope because you don't want shampoo bottles just falling out on their own, so you just have to be a little bit careful of it. I think maybe, I don't know, an 1/8 inch, 1/4 inch worth of slope in this is more than enough. If you put a level in there, you just want to see a very slight pitch to it basically. As was the case with the floor, the next day you can go ahead and remove all of your clips, wedges, tape, clean out all those grout lines, make use of the white vinegar if it helps. Take a knife, just kind of cut out any thin set that you didn't clean as you were tiling, get it prepped and ready for grout. Because we do have new drywall, new mud, we got to make sure that we prime it all. All the primer that we use is Sherwin-Williams Cover Max. And then after that, of course, you know, a light sanding between coats. We will be using Sherwin-Williams Premium Ceiling Paint for the entirety of the ceiling. And when you're doing a bathroom, you do want to be using higher quality paints that are rated for bathrooms because of the amount of moisture that, you know, you'll see when using a shower. Again, I'm not going to be going into much detail on how to create these beveled edges or fill them with epoxy as you'll be seeing. I did just want to kind of make note that that is how we finished this shower. And instead, I will refer you to a video I have dedicated on this exact subject. Everybody hates grout, and I get it. I hate grout too. That's why we use epoxy grout. If you're going to be doing this, you might be hesitant to try this, and I totally understand. I was too. However, if there's one thing I can recommend for when you're doing a shower, use epoxy grout, at least for the shower. Okay, you don't have to use it elsewhere. At the very minimum, the shower floor. This stuff's just so much better than your traditional cement-based grouts. It's not porous in the same way. It won't stain like they will. It sucks to work with. It's expensive, yes, but you only have to do that once. You only have to pay for it once. You only have to work with it once, and then it's done and it's dealt with. The traditional grout, especially if you're doing like a lighter grout, maybe a cheaper one, you're gonna be maintaining that forever. It's gonna suck. So just suffer a little bit now and reap the rewards. So this one here is Spectralock Pro by Latacrete, and it's a 3-part. So I'm going to start by cutting the part A and part B and getting the full amount of them into the small bucket here. So these are mini units. They come in different sizes. I like the mini units, especially for these large format tiles because you don't need much grout, and this stuff does set off pretty quickly. So the mini units are perfect for working with it. So I'm going to take the part A, part B, put them in their entirety into the bucket it comes with, mix them up until they're kind of fully mixed, and then we can add the Part C colorant to it and mix that up as well. One big tip I will say when it comes to this stuff with the Part C, you can actually leave up to 10% of the mixture out of it, and I always do that because if you mix the full amount, man, is it ever tough to work with. Like, it becomes really, really thick and almost impossible to get into those grout joints, especially if you're using 1/16 grout joints. So yeah, I just suggest leaving out that 10% as they say that you can. Mix it all up, and then you can immediately start working into the grout joints using an epoxy grout float specifically. For installing the grout now, this is where the suffering begins. It is a little hard to work with. Getting into the joints, it's noticeably more difficult than a traditional grout. It can be very messy too as you're trying to force it into those joints. You can fall into place. You'll see me kind of catch it by hand sometimes and just put it right back onto the float. I've just found, while messy, you do want gloves, of course. It is just a little, I don't know, easier to do it that way. At least that's how I found it. But you want to get into the joints and then just using the side of your float, get rid of any excess and then work your way throughout the shower. And you do want to be conscious of time, because after you've done this, after you've installed all your grout into the joints, after about 15 minutes, of course, refer to the manufacturer's instructions, do you want to start your first wash. And when it comes to epoxy grout, we do have 2 washes we want to do. So again, first, just get all your grout into your joints and maybe just do the walls, right? Do the walls, get that done, and then do the floor after it's all done. Because epoxy haze, that's when you're installing the grout, there'll be some leftover material on the surface of the tile. If you let that kind of cure up, this epoxy especially can be extremely difficult to get rid of that. So we want to be really careful on how we go about this. And you can see here, I am jumping immediately to the floor after doing the walls, but we have used a lot of this stuff and there are 2 of us, so we feel comfortable with doing it that way. But I just want to make it clear, if you're a beginner, if you never worked with epoxy grout, just do the walls first. Make sure your floor is covered, 100% complete the walls, and then you can do the floors after. Don't screw up your tile job at this point because you want to save a couple of hours. It's just not worth it. Also with the grout, really important, try to avoid getting it into your corners. We do want to leave those kind of free and clear for silicone later on for that expansion joint. You will get some in there, and that's okay, especially I feel like more so with the epoxy grout. But what you can do after is just kind of take any of that excess in the corners out with like a knife. Again, just being careful. But some people I know will actually silicone the corners first. I've tried that. I just prefer not to do it that way. The mini units of this epoxy grout do come with these wash packets. So they'll have your initial wash additive and then your final wash. So to begin, we're just going to take a bucket here. We're going to add the additive and then 2 gallons of water. And coupled with that, we do like to use these Arctic sponges. You don't need them. Regular sponge will work, or the sponge that comes with the bucket. However, we found that the Arctic sponge makes it a little bit easier. So anyways, once the additive and water mixture is ready, we'll take our sponge and then we'll just start kind of cleaning up the tiles. You want to be nice and gentle here. You don't want to pull all of that grout out of the lines, just a couple circular passes here. Keeping in mind that this wash we are doing about roughly 15 minutes or so after the installation of the grout. And then after this wash, we'll wait another hour or so and do the final wash. So with this initial wash here, we want to get the bulk of all that haze and kind of excess grout out of here, and then knowing that there'll be a second wash later to really get rid of any of that haze that we didn't manage to get with this one. You can see here Sebastian will do a couple grout lines or so with a sponge and then hand it off to me, and I'll hand him a second sponge. So just making sure you're washing your sponges a whole lot as you're doing this, because you don't want to just be spreading around more of that epoxy grout everywhere. For the LED tape light, all I'm doing here is taking the wires from the tape light and using butt splices to crimp them to the wires from the low voltage cable, positive to positive, negative to negative, crimp them into place, take some heat shrink, put it over top of those connections, use a lighter to activate the heat shrink, get it tight over those connections. I'll shove it all up through that hole of which it came, taking the adhesive backing off the tape light to get it onto the aluminum channel that you can see at the top there, pressing it into place. And then the final step after testing it will just be put a diffuser that came with the channel into place to protect that tape light further. This is an IP67, I believe, tape light, meaning it's suitable for wet locations, and it is in the color 3500K. Nice warm color. With our grout all cured, we can finally get the silicone into the corners. So this is Latisil by Laticrete, and it is in the same color as the grout, which I would strongly recommend. So I'm going to start here and just apply a nice thin bead in the corners. I'm going to start at the bottom of the shower. Reason being is once I have my bead in about halfway around the shower floor, maybe, I'll take some soapy water. So that's just a spray bottle with a couple spurts of hand soap, and I'm going to spray over the bead. I'll then take a popsicle stick, put it at just a slight angle, and tool the silicone to get rid of any excess and create a nice natural shape to it. The soapy water prevents the silicone from sticking to anywhere where you haven't already laid the bead, and that's why I start at the bottom, is so that I don't have any of that soapy water sprayed higher where I haven't yet laid the silicone, because if I were to do that, the silicone bead wouldn't stick and it would just create a real mess. So you can see, just kind of got that bead laid. I'm going to give it a light pass over with the soapy water, not going and spraying anywhere that I don't yet have silicone. And then I'm going to take the popsicle stick and just start doing a couple passes. My first pass, I'm going to remove the bulk of it. So I do just want to kind of do it little sections to make a more controlled go of it. And once I have some pretty nice looking corner beads here, I will do a final pass with my finger, actually, just making sure my finger has a light amount of soapy water on it as well. And that way I can really kind of get rid of any imperfections. For the lighting here, these are just 4-inch 5 color temperature pot lights. So that just means the pot lights have a color selecting switch on them. So for this bathroom, we set them to 3000K, a nice warm color. And because we have that ceiling mounted rain head in the center, we just opted to have 2 pot lights within the shower on either side, keep it nice and symmetrical. So I'm going to mark the location. We did already have one for our temporary lighting there, and you can see that wire poking out. So all we're going to do is take a 4-inch hole saw and a drill out that other pot light now, as well as the rest of the holes throughout the bathroom. And then we can loop the Romex, the 14-2 cable we'll be using from pot light to pot light, and install the pot lights for this space. Now, these ones do come with a gasket so that they're suitable for humid locations like the shower. Just want to make sure that you have something similar. To finish off where the tile profiles meet the now painted walls, Sebastian does have a multi-step process he likes to use here. So start off with some tape, just leaving a very slight reveal of that profile. Then go back with some paintable caulking, apply a very thin bead over it, smooth it all out, and then remove the tape. Once that's cured, he'll actually go back, put more tape down right along the edge of that caulking, and he can then paint it all the same color as the wall. And that just creates a really sharp line. There are many ways to do this. That's the one he likes, so do as you will. Where the tile meets the ceiling, I will actually be using a white silicone instead of the gray one that I had just used. Reason being is I've just found in the past having a darker silicone at the top kind of creates I don't know, more attention than I would like to draw to it, and whereas the white kind of blends with that ceiling paint. I'm going to tape this off. I'm going to be using the purple tape because that is freshly painted, and even this has the chance of pulling off that ceiling paint. So be extremely careful if you are going to be taping it off, or better yet, wait a few more days so that paint has a better chance to cure. You can try doing it without the tape. However, I do like a really crisp line where it meets the ceiling, hence why I'll be using the tape in this situation. So I do just want to get a very slight reveal, maybe a 16-inch along that ceiling, then go just like before with the silicone, soapy water, popsicle stick, boom. Finally, we can move on to plumbing fixtures. To start, I'm going to do the rain head. So I'll take out the brass nipple. There will be some water that comes out, of course, if you had pressure tested your fittings, which you should have. So that'll come out, let that kind of just fall out into place. And then I will take the stem piece from the rain head, and I'm going to apply some Teflon and pipe dope to the end that's going into that drop ear up above. I'm going to get that snugly into the fitting, and then I can attach the rain head itself. I won't be using any Teflon or pipe dope for the rain head connection, just because it has a black rubber gasket in it. So we'll be relying on that instead. I'm just going to get that snugly into place as well. For the handheld, same thing. Going to remove that nipple to start, let any water come out. You should have the water shut off at this point, by the way, if that wasn't obvious. And then for our handheld connection here, I'll actually be taking a 2.5-inch brass nipple, applying Teflon and pipe dope to either end. One end I will tighten into the connection point that came with this Ryobell shower kit, and the other end will thread in to the drop ear behind the tile. This cover for the handheld here did not come with a washer, surprisingly, or any sort of a gasket behind it, so I will just be using a small amount of silicone to create a kind of a U shape. So I want to get silicone almost entirely behind this, except for at the bottom I'll leave a very small gap, just if any water were to be behind this, it has a place to kind of drip out of. Vast majority of you won't have this, but this one did. And all I did here was solder a male threaded adapter onto a piece of copper. And then once again, Teflon pipe dope, screw it firmly into place. And then I can take the tub filler, kind of put it onto place, measure how much excess there is, cut that off of the pipe, ream it out, sand it, make sure it's nice and smooth. And then just use the push fitting that is the tub filler and push it onto the pipe into place. The mixing valve here does have shut-offs just in the wall that are accessible through this hole. Maybe just a flathead screwdriver to kind of loosen them. So I'm going to take out the cartridge piece with the shut-offs in the off position, and then I'll just slowly open each one just to clean out any debris that might have gone into the system. Just do a nice flush on both the hot and cold line. Every mixing valve will be different, so of course your steps will vary, but a lot will kind of follow the traditional put the cartridge in. You'll kind of have some sort of a fitting to hold that tightly into place, and typically you'll want to hand tighten it. Take a Sharpie to mark a line, and then use some channel locks to tighten it just another quarter turn. You'll just follow suit with the rest of the pieces of the trim kit for this fixture here, and at some point you'll need to make sure you turn the shutoffs on, of course, so that once you put all your trim pieces on, you'll have water that flows. You will want to test everything, so you'll want to test each shower fixture that you have. You'll want to test hot and cold. You'll want to make sure that you have the desired hot temperature that you might want, or even hotter than that, because with most of these valves, they'll have a temperature limit. So you just want to ensure that's set correctly. So just test everything here, make sure it's all working, being a little careful, of course, because you probably don't have glass in at this point. So just try to keep it somewhat contained. The handheld did come with this adjustable bar, which I really love. To set these, I do just take a laser line, make sure that everything's going to be perfect. And then I'll take some painter's tape, just kind of run it along the line. And then I'll take my grab bar or adjustable bar that is, kind of hold it up into place, figure out where I want the bottom point, mark that, and then I can mark the top hole as well. I'll take a nice 3/16 or a 1/4 inch diamond hole bit just on the grinder here, make 2 little holes to the tile so that we can screw this into the wall. After you drill your holes, it'd be a good idea to fill those with silicone before you screw it in, just to make sure it's watertight. Make sure you got your handheld on there, connect your hose line to the handheld down below. And also just a note here, with any sort of shower heads, they do come with what is called a flow restrictor in them. So, you know, I'm not telling you to take the flow restrictor out, but hypothetically, if you did, you would have some better water pressure in your shower. When it comes to the glass installation, we do use a third party. So this is Bola Glass, which are my glass subcontractors, and they just do high-end custom glass enclosures. Now, if you have a shower like this, of course, you could get just a kit from a big box store, nice sliding glass door, relatively affordable, and it's absolutely something you could do yourself. However, with all of our renovations, we do go the custom route. So here is their process. They're going to start, of course, with the laser establishing where the fixed pieces will be sitting, as well as the clips associated with these pieces. So on this shower here, we'll have 2 fixed pieces on either side, each getting 2 clips at the top, and then just the one of which the door will be hinged off of, have a lot of weight on it. We'll have 1 additional clip at the bottom here, which will go into the floor. So to start things off, they're going to bring this piece in after having marked all of their spots of which the clips will go, and they'll just sit this on some shims. After getting it into position, they will finalize the location of which they will be drilling their holes for the 3 clips, and then they'll just kind of take it once again out of place so that they can make those holes. Now, obviously, with this one here on the floor, there's a few problems here because, you know, we just spent all that time with the waterproofing membrane and now we're going to pierce it. Well, there's a few different options here. One, you could just use some sort of a construction adhesive for the clip on the floor, or maybe get away without one on the floor, depending on your glass system that you'll be using and if you're using a third party and how they like to do it. With this one here, you could also just do a hole shallow enough and a screw also short enough that it won't actually pierce the membrane below. Or alternatively, what we did here is you drill your hole, you fill it with Curdy-Fix, you put a anchor in which you put more Curdy-Fix into that plastic anchor, and then when you go and install your screw in your clip system, you know that all that Curdy-Fix will have filled any of the piercing through your waterproofing membrane. This to me has never been that big of a deal. The Curdy-Fix is, of course, a solution offered by Schluter themselves, but on top of that, we're using large format tile with epoxy grout in our joints. So I personally don't have any concerns for this, but of course, if you did, there are alternate options.
I've actually tried doing it and it's not so easy.
With the 3 clips into place, after securing the ceiling ones as well, they can then once again put the glass into position, resting on those clear shims at the bottom, which will remain underneath the glass. You'll see how they cut those later. And then with the glass against all of the clips here, they can put on the opposite piece here, tightening it with an Allen key into place, and that will hold the glass. With the 2 fixed pieces into position, they can get the door on as well. So they do have those hinges in place, making use of more shims once again, and then just resting it gently where it wants to be. They can start to tighten things up, maintaining a nice even gap on either side, really starting to secure everything. For the door here, we did opt to go for just a standard handle on the inside and a towel bar on the outside, which can be really nice. That way your towel is ready for you right as you step out of the shower. So always a nice option to consider. As noted with these clear shims below, they'll just cut it to be flush with the glass, and they'll have 2 on the bottom of each of the fixed pieces here. And then after that, they can silicone the fixed pieces into position. So with all of ours, we do leave the top clear and open, just looks a lot nicer that way and isn't really necessary for the strength of the glass. However, along the side where it meets the tile here, and then at the floor, they will do a couple of nice thick beads of clear silicone. They'll get that in there on either side. Similar to how we do our silicone, they'll spray it down with some soapy water and then tool it all to be nice, even beads. With many of our projects, we actually use a profile called Schluter Deco SG, which is sort of a channel to cap off the edges of our tile. And I do wish in hindsight I would have done that for this shower here, just because we did opt to have it right up to the casing to maximize the shower space. It was difficult for our glass guys to get that nice bead of silicone on the outside edge of this glass because the tile profile and casing were right there. So in hindsight, I would have, if I did it again, just use the Schluter Deco SG profile to cap off the edges of the shower. And then that way the glass pieces here would have just been inserted into the channel. The final piece being the gasket on the bottom, and that will just stop any of the water from getting out below the shower door here while still allowing the door to be open and closed. And there we have it. If you managed to make it this far, maybe you learned something here. If I could just ask you to maybe hit that like button or subscribe on your way out, it would be very much appreciated. If you are located within the Mississauga or surrounding areas here in Ontario, my website will be linked in the description below. You can submit a form and maybe we can work together one day. As far as the cost for a project like this goes, there is a huge variance depending on what exactly you're looking for. As such, I've tried to kind of split this down into 3 categories based on material qualities and some different methods used. Now, I'm not going to provide too much of an explanation for this. If you want something like that, just let me know and I can kind of make a whole separate video on pricing bathrooms. However, just know for these costs, they're very rough, as I mentioned, and it's just the material costs only. I'd probably recommend sticking away from that low end, but the medium to high end, there's a huge spectrum of different options within that. And other than that, I hope you have a beautiful day.